Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the opening the valve case. So to start, um, with the good to great analysis. So with the aspect of first who, then what. So one of the aspects is there's no hierarchy, so they don't have the stereotypical hierarchy of associates, managers, or chief officers. So it's critical that they have the right people on the bus, like people that this type of structure works for. And also the people choose the projects. So it also helps because, if the people can choose the projects they're interested in and the ones that they're gonna work the best on, which we'll touch on later too. And and so it's critical to find high performers to be part of the company in the first place and who are committed to success, and then it's critical for them to then make that choice of which teams they'd be the best assets for. And there's nobody with an official leadership title, but there are people often designated as leaders if they were agreed to be the most knowledgeable and best fit for leading certain projects. And it was also mentioned in the case that when interviewing candidates, one thing they asked is if the person was ready to run the company because everybody did. And so you need to find people that had those attributes that would help them. So, I guess that is also a good way to find the right people to work at the company in the first place if they already know what's expected of them in the beginning. And so with the brutal facts, um, there's a few things that we saw. So repetition doesn't work with the Val's model. I know they had the hierarchy system in Microsoft or in the Industrial Revolution for where it got repetitive, but it was quickly realized that in Valve that wasn't going to work. And they needed a different structure since with Valve, a lot of it was creating different code for different things, and it was the creative process of it. So one thing that it did mention is, code isn't that complicated. The hard part is making the code in the first place and making it work. And also there was a point in the article where it talked about how, well, they were working a lot with PCs, and Microsoft eventually was talking about the idea and eventually did make a closed Windows store. And so while there originally was a more open gaming environment when PC games were becoming popular, this closed window system did not help anything especially when they introduced Origin. And open architecture was decreasing, which was concerning since that was what Valve's whole structure revolved around. And even with open architecture, Valve didn't have control over the hardware that games were running on. So very inconsistent. So something that they needed to look into more. And in the past, they'd been so focused on the software side of things, and they tried some in-house hardware development, such as I think one time it said in the article something about them trying to make a mouse, but the things they tried to design just didn't have very big success, so they usually outsourced it. But they also thought it would be good to produce it in-house so that they'd have more control over how it would fit with the software they designed. So this would mean if they did change this, they would need to hire more employees with expertise. So different things they had to look at more. So with the hedgehog concept, I already touched this a little bit earlier, but the way that this company was even formed in the first place was the owner, he had worked at Microsoft and he realized he was super passionate about programming and about video games. And there was research done on the economic viability, and with that experience at Microsoft, he knew that, and with the research he'd done, he knew it was something he could succeed at. And so also with who they wanted in the company, um, they wanted people who were highly skilled at a variety of very valuable things, but experts in a narrow discipline. And so this helped when they were on certain teams for certain projects because it assured that each project was occupied by those with the best skill sets for said tasks. So I guess that also, yeah, that does go a lot along with getting the right people on the bus and in the right places too. And so they were initially using Quake to develop their games, but they eventually decided to bring it in-house, knowing that this was something they could be great at. And so I'll touch that more when I'm talking about the flywheel. But that's one thing that it did talk about a lot in Good to Great is, there were companies that tried to do everything in-house and there were some things they just weren't going to be good at and it screwed them over. But with Valve, they knew that this was something they could be good at. So them making the decision, this company ultimately helped them. And going back to them deciding whether or not to start designing hardware in-house, they also needed to decide if they would be able to be great at that, like they were at software development. And it'd be critical in whether or not they could last as a company because they were getting to that point where they needed to figure that out. And the culture of discipline, I touched on it earlier, but there was no traditional hierarchy, so having discipline to get everything done was critical of each employee. And they didn't have the structure of having somebody micromanage them, so it was up to everybody to be committed to the vision of the company. One thing I like that it talked about in here, which I think is a big part of this type of industry, is is that the customer was their boss. They had to design software in a way that the customer would like it and that the customer would be satisfied. And so they didn't have a bunch of regulations like a lot of other companies have because they just had to trust the employees would use their creativity to make the best designs. And there was one point in the case where I talked about customers making a request to be able to game in the same room as their friends or family. And then a group of employees started to figure out what to do about it, showing that there was a culture there of putting the customer first. And while each customer did have their expertise, they were encouraged to keep learning through projects and develop new skill sets, as I mentioned earlier. And with technology accelerators, they this is a big part. This is a company that is technology, so there are a lot of strategic uses of and implementations of technology. So with initially using open ecosystems for gaming, the gamers would only have to buy the game and not the machine to buy it. So they wouldn't need to produce hardware. And so they first bought the license to the Quake game engine, but then there was an IPS battle going on, and so that's when they decided to implement their own software, Steam, to make it easier for users to play their games. And they even opened it up to other non-Valve games. And so and that helped them a lot when they made that change. And then when Microsoft made the closed Windows Store with the Windows 8 update, Valve decided to switch to Linux to make sure that it wouldn't inhibit their designs. So all very strategic. It wasn't just them jumping on whatever new technology came up. They made sure that it was relevant to their company and that they had enough research that it would help and it wouldn't hinder. Now, with the flywheel and the doom loop, um, so in the beginning of the case, it talked about blockbuster games and the research done on if they are random or if they are meth methodic. And they included that there were aspects of the games that made them successful that needed to be looked into. And so this kind of relates to technology accelerators as well, but they use the Source engine, which helped with superior graphics and modular development, and also helped with rapid adaptation. And the small change made a huge impact on the company. And then there's this Steam Greenlight. So it was a way that people could collaborate and gamers could give feedback on how to improve the games. And it was a great way to gather information, especially on which games they wanted to be available on Steam. And then Big Picture was an attempt on making the games available to play on TV. And the reason why I bring this up here is because they weren't going to do some big crazy innovations, but they were being methodical and experimenting on how to make PC gaming a multi-room experience. And they knew it wasn't a fix for everything. And the deciding on how or if to manufacture hardware in-house hits many aspects of the good to great model, but it hits this one because this wasn't something that was part of their original model, So they had to figure out how to implement it and not completely compromise with their company and what they were built on. So all and this is a hard company to I think a lot of the companies they talked about the Flywheel to the Doom Loop were companies where it was easier to kind of take it slow, but with a company like this where technology was evolving, there were a lot of huge changes, but they just had to do the research and make sure that the changes that Valve was making to adapt were going to help the company and they weren't gonna ruin it. And so, and I didn't touch as much on the level 5 leader or on the built to last, but with level 5 leader, I do think that they were level 5 leaders in the fact that they weren't trying to micromanage their employees and that they weren't there to get the recognition and the praise. And then with Built to Last, they were making the changes and the steps necessary to make sure that the company could last for longer than just the meantime. So with the Peter Principles and personal framework, so there are a couple of key components that are kind of all related, but it's basically opposite of what's in the Good to Great book. And so there's the reaching incompetence. And so two of the main causes were the burnout and the lack of necessary skills, and then the qualities of leaders. And so good leader, I like the quote that says they manage themselves well, are committed to the organization and to a purpose, principle, or person outside of themselves, build their competence and focus their efforts for maximum impact, and are courageous, honest, and credible. So it's kind of relates to what the Good to Great book talks about with a level 5 leader. And there are 6 questions asked about whether someone is a good leader or boss, and the main themes are if they have your best interest, if they're clear in communication, and if they take feedback and don't get defensive. And this quote outlines what the good to great, and yeah, and not only is this what a good to great leader is, but it's also the type of person that I hope to and strive to be each day. And so, how this impacts my framework. So, I kind of made a few adjustments to the framework based on what I saw in the Peter Principles article and in the Valve article. So, one is finding the right fit. Um, so, in order to avoid reaching a point of incompetence, I always have to make sure to ask about that in the beginning when interviewing to find a place to work and making sure that it will help me to continue to challenge myself and learn something new each day. And also making sure, like, also being willing to branch out if a particular environment has become stagnant. And I imagine my basic why will stay the same, but everybody evolves and nobody's life is the same when they are 25 as when they are 45. And it is possible that moving jobs will become necessary to meet our changing lives. And then with methodic is better than faster impulsive. Seen that in all 3 of the cases we've done so far, and I've seen that in my life. Um, so in the Peter Principles article, it talks about how they took time to find a new CEO. They didn't just jump right on the first person that seemed obvious. They took 3 candidates and worked them through different scenarios and different cases. They interviewed them, they asked people around them, they took time, and the candidate they chose wasn't the obvious candidate, but he ended up being someone that they thought would actually help the company and not fall victim to the Peter Principles. And then I've seen this in the jobs I've had when going through the process of researching and interviewing. And I found great jobs. And when I just take the first job offered to me, I normally end up regretting it. And then in conclusion, every industry and individual is different. Behind every company is a great leader, and adaptation is key to survival. But anyway, so that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.